The night a captain threw away her badge and changed a kingdom forever. She slammed the metal down so hard the stone table cracked. 5 years of blood, sweat, and victories no one would credit to her name. 5 years of watching fools promoted over her because they had the right bloodline. Captain Elara Voss was done. But as she turned to leave, a hand closed around her wrist. Iron strong, unyielding. The Alpha King himself stepped from the shadows, his voice low and dangerous. You think I don't know who really saved this kingdom? Stay with me until the end, like this video. Comment what city you're watching from. The throne room was empty. That was the only reason Elara had the courage to do it. She stood alone in the cavernous chamber, her boots echoing on black marble floors that stretched toward a throne carved from obsidian and steel. Torchlight flickered against walls hung with banners from 100 conquered territories. Outside, the frontier wind howled through the stone corridors of the royal keep, a sound like wolves mourning their dead. Elara reached into her coat and pulled out the silver captain's badge she'd worn for 5 years. 5 years of leading men into battle. 5 years of writing strategy reports in secret because no one would listen if they knew a woman had penned them. 5 years of watching incompetent nobles' sons climb ranks she'd earned with blood. She walked forward, her jaw set, her heart a clenched fist in her chest. When she reached the War Council's table, a slab of volcanic stone still bearing scorch marks from ancient fires, she raised the badge high and slammed it down. The metal struck stone with a crack that split the silence like thunder. A hairline fracture spread across the table's surface. I'm done, she said aloud, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. I'm done being invisible. She turned toward the tall double doors, ready to walk out of this forsaken palace and never look back. She'd ride south, maybe join a mercenary company that valued skill over bloodlines, maybe disappear into the frontier towns where no one cared who your father was. She took 3 steps. Then a hand closed around her wrist. Elara's combat instincts flared. She spun, her free hand reaching for the dagger at her belt, but froze when she saw who held her. Alpha King Ronan Draven stood less than a foot away, towering over her by nearly a head. His presence filled the room like a physical force. Broad-shouldered, dressed in black leather and steel, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He'd earned that scar leading a charge against the Northland Reavers when he was barely 20. Now, at 32, he was the most feared ruler on the frontier, and he was holding her wrist with fingers that felt like they could crush stone. Let go, Elara said, her voice cold. No. His voice was deep, quiet, and absolutely unyielding. Not until you hear me out. I don't serve you anymore. I don't serve anyone in this rotten court. I know. His grip didn't loosen, but something in his expression shifted, something almost approving. That's exactly why I'm not letting you leave. Elara stared at him. She'd been in the same room as the king perhaps a dozen times in 5 years, always standing at attention with the other officers while he addressed the War Council. He'd never looked at her, never spoken to her directly. She was just another face in uniform, or so she'd thought. You wrote them, Ronan said quietly. Every anonymous strategy report that saved this kingdom in the last 3 years. The plan to fortify the eastern passes before the winter raids. The supply chain reform that ended the famine in the border garrisons. The tactical withdrawal from Raven's Gorge that everyone called cowardice until it lured the enemy into a trap and crushed them. Elara's blood turned to ice. I don't know what you're... Don't. His eyes locked onto hers, and she felt the words die in her throat. I've read every word you've written. I know your handwriting. I know the way you think. I've known for 2 years. Her mind reeled. Then why didn't you... Because I wanted to see how long you'd keep fighting even when no one gave you credit. He released her wrist but didn't step back. I wanted to see if you'd break. And you just did. Not by giving up, but by refusing to stay invisible. Elara's pulse hammered in her ears. Anger, confusion, and something else, something dangerous, churned in her chest. You let them mock me. You let them promote idiots over me while you became the best strategic mind in my kingdom. Yes. His voice was calm, factual. And now I'm going to make you an offer. I don't want your pity promotion. Good, because that's not what this is. Ronan crossed his arms. Stay for 1 week. 7 days. Openly advise me in front of the council. Let them see what you can do when your name is on your work. If after 7 days you still want to leave, I'll give you a letter of recommendation that will make any mercenary company in the world fight over you. And if I say no right now, then you walk out that door, and I lose the only person in this palace who actually knows how to win a war." He paused. "And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have changed everything." The words hung between them like a blade balanced on its edge. Elara should have said no, should have walked away. This was a trap. It had to be. The court would eat her alive. The nobles would never accept a common-born woman openly wielding power. But a small, furious part of her wanted to see their faces when she proved them all wrong. 1 week, she said. 1 week, Ronan agreed. "And if they try to sabotage me, then they'll answer to me." His eyes held hers. "Personally." She picked up her badge from the cracked table. The metal was still warm from her hand. "Tomorrow morning," Ronan said. "War Council. Dawn." He turned and walked toward a side door she hadn't noticed before, disappearing into the shadows as silently as he'd emerged. Elara stood alone in the throne room, her badge clutched in her fist, her future suddenly and terrifyingly uncertain. The next morning, Elara dressed in her full captain's uniform, black leather armor reinforced with steel plates, her sword belted at her hip, her dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. She looked like she was going to war. In a way, she was. The War Council chamber was located in the North Tower, a circular room with a massive oak table at its center and maps covering every wall. When Elara entered, 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Lord Castor, the aging master of war, frowned. "Captain Voss, you're not scheduled to attend." "She is now." Ronan's voice cut through the room like a blade. He sat at the head of the table, already reviewing a map spread before him. "Captain Voss will be advising me directly on all strategic matters." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Lord Harwin, a barrel-chested nobleman whose father had bought him a generalship, laughed. "A woman advising the king on war?" "Yes." Ronan didn't look up from his map. "Do you have a problem with that, Harwin?" The laughter died. "No, my king, of course not." "Good. Then sit down and listen." Elara moved to the table, acutely aware of every hostile gaze tracking her. She recognized most of the men here, career officers who'd inherited their positions, nobles who treated military service as a formality, and a handful of genuine soldiers who looked more curious than hostile. Ronan gestured to the map. "The raider clans are massing in the western territories. Our scouts report at least 3,000 fighters gathering near Black Ridge. Lord Castor has proposed we send 5,000 troops to meet them head-on and crush them before they can organize." He looked at Elara. "Your assessment?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Elara stepped forward and studied the map. Black Ridge, rough terrain, narrow passes, limited water sources. She'd read the intelligence reports, the real ones, not the sanitized summaries the council saw. "It's a trap," she said. Lord Castor bristled. "Nonsense. Our intelligence is sound." "Your intelligence is incomplete." Elara pointed to a series of small villages marked on the map. "These settlements reported raider activity 3 weeks ago, then went silent. You assumed they were destroyed, but there's no evidence of that. No refugees, no bodies, no smoke." "Your point?" Harwin said dismissively. "My point is that the raiders are using those villages as staging grounds. They're not massing at Black Ridge. They're behind it, hidden in the forest here." She traced a line on the map. "If we march 5,000 troops through the passes, we'll be surrounded and slaughtered." "Ridiculous," Castor snapped. "We have maps, scouts, years of experience. And I have their pattern of behavior." Elara's voice was sharp. "The Western clans always feint toward open ground to draw large forces, then attack from cover. They did it at Crow's Nest. They did it at Twin Falls. They'll do it again." Ronan leaned forward. "What do you suggest instead?" Elara pulled the map toward her, her mind already 3 steps ahead. "We send a smaller force, 2,000 troops, to Black Ridge as bait. But we position our main force here in the forest south of the passes. When the raiders spring their ambush, we spring ours. We collapse on them from 2 sides and cut off their retreat." "That requires splitting our forces," Lord Castor protested. "It's tactically unsound. It's the only way to win without losing half our army. Elara met his gaze steadily. Unless you'd prefer to bury 5,000 soldiers because you were too proud to adapt. The room erupted. This is outrageous. She has no authority. We should follow established doctrine. Enough! Ronan's voice cracked like a whip. Silence fell instantly. He looked around the table, his expression cold. Does anyone here have a better plan? One that doesn't involve marching into an obvious trap? No one spoke. Then we use Captain Voss's strategy. He turned to his military secretary. Draft the orders. 2,000 to Black Ridge under Commander Thrace, the main force under my personal command in the southern forest. We move at dawn. Lord Castor's face had turned purple. My king, this is highly irregular. So is losing a war because my advisors are too stubborn to listen to good strategy. Ronan stood. This meeting is over. Dismissed. The council members filed out, most of them shooting venomous glares at Elara as they passed. When the room had emptied, Ronan turned to her. You just made a lot of powerful enemies. I noticed. Good. A ghost of a smile touched his face. Means you're doing something right. Elara looked down at the map, at the strategy she'd just laid out for all to see. For the first time, her name would be attached to a plan. If it worked, she'd prove herself. If it failed, this had better work, she muttered. It will, Ronan said with absolute certainty. Because you don't make mistakes on a battlefield. I've read your work. You see patterns no one else sees. Patterns can change. Not the ones that matter. He rolled up the map. Get some rest. We ride tomorrow night. As Elara left the chamber, she felt the weight of a dozen futures pressing down on her. This was it. Her one chance to prove she belonged here, or to fail so spectacularly that she'd be remembered as the woman who destroyed the kingdom's army. No pressure. The next 36 hours were a blur of preparation. Elara worked alongside the military quartermasters, ensuring the southern force had the supplies they'd need for a rapid deployment. She reviewed troop rosters, identified the best scouts, and personally inspected the equipment for signs of sabotage. Because she knew it was coming. The nobility hated her. They'd do anything to see her fail. On the second night, as she was checking weapon stores in the armory, she found it. 3 barrels of arrows with deliberately weakened shafts. They'd splinter on impact, leaving soldiers defenseless in battle. Elara traced the supply stamp on the barrels. Lord Harwin's estate. She confiscated the entire shipment and had fresh arrows distributed instead. She said nothing to anyone, but she made a mental note. When the army marched at midnight, Elara rode near the front of the main column just behind King Ronan. 4,000 soldiers moved through the darkness like a river of steel and shadow. The forest swallowed them, and the night fell quiet except for the whisper of boots on earth and the occasional clink of armor. Ronan rode a massive black warhorse that seemed almost mythical in the moonlight. He said nothing, but Elara could feel his presence, steady, unyielding, and somehow reassuring. After 3 hours, they reached the planned position, a dense stretch of forest with clear sight lines to the passes where the bait force would engage the raiders. The soldiers took their positions silently. Elara moved through the ranks, making small adjustments, ensuring everyone understood the signal system they'd use to coordinate the attack. And then they waited. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of ash and amber. In the distance, horns sounded, the bait force engaging the enemy at Black Ridge. Elara stood beside Ronan on a small rise that overlooked the battlefield. Her hand rested on her sword hilt, her every muscle coiled tight. "They're coming," Ronan murmured. And they were. Through the trees, Elara saw the raider force, not 3,000, but closer to 4. They poured out of hidden positions in the forest, exactly where she'd predicted, rushing to surround the bait force. "Now," Ronan said quietly. The signal went up, a series of flags visible only to their hidden forces, and 4,000 soldiers exploded from the forest like a tidal wave. The raiders never saw it coming. Elara's strategy had been perfect. The main force hit the raiders from the south and west simultaneously, collapsing their formation and cutting off any retreat into the trees. The bait force, far from being overwhelmed, pivoted and drove forward, trapping the enemy in a deadly vice. The battle lasted less than an hour. When the dust settled, the raider force was shattered. Survivors fled into the wilderness, their leadership dead, their supplies captured, and the kingdom's army had suffered less than 200 casualties. Elara stood in the aftermath, breathing hard, her uniform splattered with dirt and blood that wasn't hers. Around her, soldiers were cheering, embracing, shouting her name, "Voss, Voss, Voss!" She looked up and found Ronan watching her from across the battlefield. He didn't smile, didn't cheer, but he nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt more significant than any medal. When they returned to the capital 3 days later, the city erupted in celebration. News of the victory had arrived ahead of them, and crowds lined the streets throwing flowers and chanting the king's name. But in the palace, the mood was darker. Elara was summoned to the throne room that evening. When she entered, she found the full royal court assembled. Nobles, ministers, high-ranking officers, all standing in a semicircle before the throne. Ronan sat in the center, his posture regal and cold. "Captain Elara Voss," he said formally. "Step forward." Elara walked to the center of the room, every eye tracking her. "You were appointed as my strategic advisor 1 week ago," Ronan continued. "Your first action was to dismantle a battle plan endorsed by my entire war council. Your second was to propose an unconventional strategy that many here called reckless." Lord Castor looked smug. Lord Harwin smirked. Ronan stood. "That strategy won us the most decisive victory against the Raider clans in a decade. You saved thousands of lives. You proved that merit, not bloodline, wins wars." He descended the steps from his throne and walked toward her. "Effective immediately, you are promoted to the rank of general and appointed as my chief strategic advisor. You will have full authority over military planning and will answer only to me." The court exploded into shocked whispers. Ronan raised a hand and silence fell. "Does anyone here wish to challenge this appointment?" Lord Harwin opened his mouth, then closed it when Ronan's gaze landed on him like a physical weight. "No, my king," Castor said stiffly. "Good." Ronan turned back to Elara. "Do you accept?" Elara looked at the faces around her, the hatred, the envy, the barely concealed fury. She thought of the sabotaged arrows, the whispered insults, the years of being invisible, and she smiled. "I accept." Ronan extended his hand. She clasped it, and the court watched in stunned silence as the king and the common-born general shook hands as equals. That night, as Elara walked through the palace corridors toward her newly assigned quarters in the north wing, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, hand on her sword, but it was only Ronan. He'd changed out of his formal attire into simpler clothes, though he still moved like a predator even in relaxed dress. "You handled yourself well today," he said. "I've had practice being hated." "That's not what I meant." He fell into step beside her. "You could have gloated, could have humiliated them, but you didn't. Humiliating them would just make them more dangerous." Elara glanced at him. "I need them to fear my competence, not my cruelty." Spoken like a true leader. They walked in silence for a moment. "Why did you really stop me that night?" Elara asked quietly. "You could have let me walk away." Ronan was quiet for a long moment. "Because I've been ruling alone for 10 years. Every person in this palace wants something from me, power, favor, wealth. But you? You just wanted to be seen for what you are." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I've been looking for someone like you my entire reign, someone who doesn't want my throne, someone who just wants to do the work." Elara met his gaze. "And if I still want to leave after the week is up? Then I'll keep my word and write you that letter." He paused. "But I don't think you will." "Why not?" "Because you're already planning how to reform the entire military structure, aren't you?" Elara felt a smile tug at her lips despite herself. "Maybe." "That's what I thought." Ronan's expression softened, just slightly. "Welcome to the war, General Voss." He walked away, leaving Elara alone in the corridor. She looked down at the insignia of her new rank pinned to her uniform. General. Chief Strategic Advisor. The most powerful military position in the kingdom, held by a woman who 3 weeks ago had been ready to disappear forever. She thought about the nobles who hated her, the officers who resented her, the impossible standards she'd be held to. And she thought, good, let them try to stop me. Elara Voss was done being invisible. The real war was just beginning. The first attempt on her life came 6 days after her promotion. Elara had known it was coming. She'd felt the hatred simmering in the palace corridors, seen the poisonous glances from nobles, whose power she'd inadvertently threatened simply by existing. What she hadn't expected was how clumsy it would be. She was reviewing supply manifests in her new office, a sparse room in the North Tower with a view of the training grounds, when the door opened without a knock. 3 soldiers entered, wearing the crimson sashes of Lord Harwin's personal guard. Elara's hand moved to her sword hilt without thinking. "I don't recall summoning you." The lead soldier, a scarred man with dead eyes, closed the door behind them. "Lord Harwin requests your presence in the lower armory. Urgent matter regarding the new weapons shipment." "Then Lord Harwin can come here." Elara stood slowly, her body coiled like a spring. "I'm busy." "I'm afraid he insists." The soldier's hand drifted toward his own weapon. Elara's mind calculated distances, angles, odds. 3 against 1 in a confined space. They had the numbers, but she had trained with the frontier cavalry, where every fight was a potential death sentence. These were palace guards, well-fed, underworked, overconfident. "Tell Lord Harwin," she said clearly, "that if he wants to kill me, he should at least have the courage to do it himself instead of sending amateurs." The lead soldier's face darkened. His hand closed on his sword. The door exploded inward. Ronan filled the doorway like a force of nature, his expression carved from winter stone. Behind him stood Commander Thrace and 4 royal guards. "Remove your hand from that sword," Ronan said, each word dropping like an executioner's blade. The soldier's hand fell away as if burned. All 3 of Harwin's men suddenly looked like they desperately wanted to be anywhere else. "My king, you were attempting to intimidate my chief strategic advisor." Ronan stepped into the room, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Did you think I wouldn't notice 3 armed men entering her office uninvited? Did you think I don't have eyes in every corner of this palace?" The lead soldier's face had gone pale. "Lord Harwin said—" "I don't care what Lord Harwin said." Ronan's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You have 2 choices. 1, you tell me exactly what you were ordered to do. 2, I have Commander Thrace extract the information in less pleasant ways." The soldier broke immediately. "We were told to escort her to the lower armory. Lord Castor and Lord Harwin would be waiting. They said they just wanted to talk, to convince her to resign quietly." "And if she refused?" Silence. "Get out!" Ronan roared, and the 3 soldiers fled like rabbits before a wolf. When they were gone, Ronan turned to Thrace. "Arrest Lord Harwin and Lord Castor. Charge them with conspiracy and attempted intimidation of a royal officer. They can cool off in the cells while I decide what to do with them." "Yes, my king." Thrace departed with the guards, leaving Ronan and Elara alone. Elara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You have excellent timing. I've had you under protective watch since your promotion." Ronan moved to her window, looking down at the training grounds below. "I told you they'd try to sabotage you. I just didn't think they'd be stupid enough to try it so openly." "They're desperate." Elara joined him at the window. "My victory at Black Ridge made them look incompetent. If I succeed again, their hold on power weakens further. Then they're about to learn what happens when they threaten someone under my protection." Ronan's jaw was tight. "I should have anticipated this. Should have moved faster to neutralize them." "You can't protect me from everything." Elara looked at him directly. "If I'm going to hold this position, I need to prove I can defend myself and my decisions. Otherwise, I'm just another symbol they can manipulate." "You're not a symbol, you're—" Ronan stopped himself, his expression flickering with something unreadable. "What?" "You're the first person in this court who actually gives a damn about saving lives instead of playing politics." He turned to face her fully. "That makes you dangerous to them, and valuable to me." The air between them felt suddenly charged with unspoken weight. Elara found herself acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the intensity in Ronan's storm-gray eyes. A knock at the door broke the moment. "Enter," Elara called, stepping back. A young courier rushed in, breathless. "General Voss, urgent message from the eastern border. The Shadowfen clans are mobilizing. Our scouts report at least 6,000 warriors gathering near the marshlands." Elara's blood went cold. The Shadowfen clans were the most vicious raiders on the frontier, organized, brutal, and led by a warlord named Carvath, who'd never lost a battle. If they were mobilizing in force, it meant they were planning something massive. "When did this intelligence arrive?" Ronan demanded. "An hour ago, my king. Lord Castor was informed, but he was too busy trying to murder my general to do his job," Ronan finished grimly. He looked at Elara. "Gather the war council, now." The emergency council meeting convened within the hour. The circular chamber was packed with officers, nobles, and military advisors, all speaking in urgent, overlapping voices. The absence of Lord Castor and Lord Harwin, both currently imprisoned, had thrown the hierarchy into chaos. Ronan slammed his fist on the table, and silence fell like a dropped blade. "General Voss," he said, "report." Elara stepped forward, her uniform immaculate despite the chaos of the last hour. She'd reviewed every scrap of intelligence about the Shadowfen clans during the brief preparation time, cross-referencing it with historical raid patterns and geographical data. "The Shadowfen clans are mobilizing 6,000 warriors near the eastern marshlands," she began, her voice clear and confident. "This is 3 times their normal raiding force. They're not planning a raid, they're planning an invasion." "Impossible," Lord Corwin, an elderly general, scoffed. "The Shadowfen have never had the organization for sustained warfare. They do now." Elara unrolled a map across the table. "Carvath has been consolidating power for 2 years. He's united 7 clans under a single banner. Our scouts report they're stockpiling supplies, building siege equipment, and training in organized formations. This isn't a raid. It's war." Murmurs of alarm rippled through the chamber. "What's their objective?" Ronan asked. Elara pointed to a city marked on the eastern border. "Ironhaven. It's our largest trading port, the gateway to the southern kingdoms, and virtually undefended. We pulled most of the garrison to reinforce the western territories after the last raider attack." "Then we send reinforcements immediately," General Thrace said. 10,000 troops, fortify the city." "We don't have 10,000 troops to spare," Elara interrupted. "We have 8,000 total in active deployment, and half are still recovering from the Western campaign. If we strip the other borders to defend Ironhaven, we leave the capital vulnerable." "Then what do you propose?" Lord Corwin challenged. "Let them take the city?" "No." Elara's finger traced a path on the map. "We don't defend Ironhaven. We defend this." She tapped a narrow valley 20 miles north of the city, where a river cut through steep canyon walls. "Raven's Gate," she said. "It's the only viable route for an army of 6,000 to march toward Ironhaven with siege equipment. The terrain everywhere else is marshland, impossible for heavy wagons. If we hold Raven's Gate, we can bottle them up and pick them apart." "Hold a valley with how many troops?" Corwin demanded. "We'd need thousands to defend terrain like that." "We'd need 3,000, Elara corrected. "And we have exactly that if we pull from the southern and northern garrisons. We position archers on the high ground, infantry in the valley mouth, and cavalry in reserve. When Carvath's army enters the valley, we collapse the walls." "Collapse the walls?" someone echoed incredulously. "Controlled demolition. We've used it before at Crow's Nest." Elara's eyes blazed with conviction. "The valley walls are limestone, unstable. A few well-placed charges will bring them down. We bury half their army in rubble, demoralize the rest, and finish them with a cavalry charge." The room erupted in argument. "This is madness. We should defend the city properly. You're asking us to gamble everything on collapsing rocks." "Enough!" Ronan's voice cut through the chaos like a sword through silk. He studied the map, his expression unreadable. "If this fails, we lose Ironhaven and expose the entire eastern frontier." "If we defend Ironhaven directly, we lose the city anyway," Elara said steadily. "Carvath has siege towers, battering rams, and numerical superiority. He'll take the city in a week, and we'll lose thousands trying to hold walls that can't be held. This is our only chance." Ronan's eyes met hers across the table. In that moment, Elara saw him weighing not just the strategy but her, measuring her conviction, her certainty, her willingness to stake everything on this plan. "How sure are you?" he asked quietly. "Absolutely certain." She didn't blink, didn't waver. "This will work." Ronan nodded slowly. Then he turned to the council. We use General Voss's plan. Mobilize 3,000 troops to Raven's Gate immediately. I'll lead them personally. My king, you can't, Corwin protested. I can, and I will. Ronan's tone brooked no argument. General Voss will accompany me as chief strategist. Commander Thrace, you have command of the capital defenses in my absence. Thrace saluted sharply. Yes, my king. As the council dispersed to prepare, Lord Corwin caught Elara's arm. His grip was firm, his eyes hard. If this plan fails, he said quietly, you won't just destroy your career. You'll destroy the kingdom. Elara met his gaze without flinching. Then I'd better not fail. They rode out at dawn with 3,000 soldiers, 200 cavalry, and enough explosives to bring down a mountain. The journey to Raven's Gate took 4 days of hard riding through frontier wilderness, past abandoned farmsteads and burned villages, evidence of the Shadowfen clan's advanced scouts. Elara rode near the front of the column, beside Ronan. They spoke little during the journey, but she felt his presence like a constant anchor, steady, unyielding, and strangely comforting. On the third night, as they made camp in a pine forest, Ronan found her studying maps by firelight outside her tent. You should rest, he said. I'll rest when this is over. Elara didn't look up from the topographical survey she'd been analyzing. The demolition points need to be perfect. If we miscalculate by even 10 feet, the avalanche could hit our own troops. Ronan sat down across from her, his movements quiet despite his size. You carry the weight of 3,000 lives on your shoulders. So do you, every day. I was born to it. He poked at the fire with a stick. You chose it. Elara finally looked up. Is there a difference? Yes. His eyes reflected the firelight, making them seem almost molten. People born to power often take it for granted. People who choose it understand what it costs. What does it cost you? The question slipped out before Elara could stop it. Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Everything I wanted to be before I became what I had to be. The raw honesty in his voice startled her. She'd seen him as the Alpha King, powerful, terrifying, untouchable. But in this moment, by firelight in the wilderness, he was just a man carrying an impossible burden. What did you want to be? She asked softly. An explorer. A ghost of a smile touched his face. I wanted to sail beyond the frontier, map uncharted territories, discover places no one had ever seen. Instead, I got a crown and a kingdom that's constantly trying to tear itself apart. You could still explore. After this war, there's always another war. Ronan's expression hardened again. That's what it means to rule the frontier. You fight or you die. Elara understood that truth in her bones. The frontier wasn't a place for dreamers. It was a place for survivors. For what it's worth, she said, I think you're a better king than explorer. The frontier needs someone who understands how to fight. And what does the frontier need you to be, General Voss? She considered the question seriously. Proof that merit matters more than bloodlines. That anyone can rise if they're willing to bleed for it. You've already proven that. Not yet. Elara rolled up her maps. If this plan fails tomorrow, I'll just be another cautionary tale about upstarts who flew too high. It won't fail. Ronan's certainty was absolute. You don't make mistakes in battle. I've watched you work. You see the battlefield like a living thing, every variable, every possibility. It's almost terrifying. Should I be flattered or concerned that my king finds me terrifying? Both. The corner of his mouth quirked. The best weapons are always a little dangerous. Something in his tone made Elara's pulse quicken. The air between them felt charged again, heavy with unspoken words. You should sleep, Ronan said, standing abruptly. Tomorrow will be brutal. He walked away before Elara could respond, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight. She sat alone, staring into the flames, and wondered what it meant that the most powerful man in the kingdom looked at her like she was both his greatest asset and his most dangerous gamble. They reached Raven's Gate at noon the next day. The valley was exactly as Elara had envisioned, a narrow corridor between two towering limestone cliffs with a river rushing through the center. The walls rose 300 feet on either side, riddled with natural fissures and unstable rock formations. It was perfect. Elara immediately set the engineers to work, placing explosives in carefully calculated positions along both cliff faces. The soldiers dug defensive positions at the valley mouth, constructing barriers and positioning archers on the high ground. By nightfall, everything was in place, and just after midnight, the scouts returned with grim news. "Carvath's army is 10 miles out," the lead scout reported breathlessly. "They're moving faster than expected. They'll reach the valley by dawn." Elara's mind raced. Dawn. That gave them less than 5 hours to finalize positions, brief the troops, and prepare for the most critical battle of her life. "Wake everyone," she ordered. "Full battle readiness. No fires, no noise. I want absolute silence." As soldiers scrambled to their positions, Ronan appeared at her side. He was already in full armor, his massive sword strapped across his back. "Are we ready?" he asked quietly. "We'd better be." Elara checked her own weapons, sword, 2 daggers, and a short bow. "Once they enter the valley, there's no turning back." "Good." Ronan's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I'm tired of turning back." The hours before dawn crawled by like wounded animals. Elara moved through the troops, checking positions, offering quiet encouragement, making minute adjustments to the defensive line. She could feel the tension rising like a physical force. 3,000 soldiers waiting in darkness for an enemy that outnumbered them 2-1. When the first gray light touched the eastern sky, a horn sounded in the distance. Carvath's army had arrived. Elara climbed to the high observation point beside Ronan, and her breath caught. 6,000 warriors filled the approach to the valley like a living sea. They moved in organized columns, their armor glinting in the dawn light, siege towers rolling on massive wheels, battering rams carried by teams of oxen. This wasn't a raider horde. This was a professional army, and leading them, mounted on a massive warhorse and wearing armor made from black iron and bone, was Carvath himself. Even from a distance, Elara could feel his presence, a predator who'd built his reputation on never losing. "He's going to send scouts first," Elara murmured, more to herself than Ronan. "He's too smart to commit his whole force without—" As if responding to her words, a group of 50 riders broke from the main army and entered the valley at a gallop. "Let them come," Ronan said. "They'll see our defensive positions and report back. Carvath will think we're trying to hold the valley conventionally." The scouts rode halfway through the valley, saw the barriers and troops at the far end, and wheeled their horses around, racing back to Carvath. 15 minutes later, the main army began to advance. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Hold positions," she called down to the troops. "Wait for my signal." 6,000 warriors entered the valley in a massive column, their boots shaking the ground like thunder. The siege towers rolled forward, the rams swayed on their carriers, and officers barked orders in harsh frontier dialects. Elara waited, counting heartbeats, watching the army flow into the valley like water into a cup. 1,000 troops inside. 2,000. 3,000. The leading edge of the army was now less than 200 yards from the defensive positions. Archers drew back their bowstrings. Infantry gripped their weapons. 4,000 inside the valley. 5,000. "Now," Elara said quietly. A single arrow arced into the sky, the signal. The world exploded. Charges detonated simultaneously along both cliff faces, and the limestone walls shattered like broken teeth. Massive chunks of rock, some the size of houses, tore free and plummeted into the valley with a sound like the earth screaming. The Shadowfen army had perhaps 2 seconds to realize what was happening before the avalanche hit. Thousands of tons of stone crashed down on the packed column, crushing men and equipment, throwing bodies into the air like broken dolls. The sound was indescribable, a roaring, grinding, apocalyptic thunder that seemed to split the sky. When the dust began to settle, the valley was transformed. The center of Carvath's army had been obliterated, buried under mountains of rubble. The survivors, perhaps 2,000 warriors at the front and rear of the column, stood in shock, separated by an impassable wall of broken stone. "Cavalry!" Ronan roared. "Charge!" 200 riders exploded from concealed positions on both sides of the valley, crashing into the disoriented survivors with devastating force. Infantry followed, and what had been an organized army became a massacre. Elara drew her sword and joined the fight, her training taking over as she cut through the chaos. The Shadowfen warriors fought with desperate ferocity, but they were broken, leaderless, traumatized, and surrounded. Through the carnage, Elara saw Carvath himself, fighting like a cornered wolf near the valley entrance. He'd killed 6 soldiers already, his black blade singing as it carved through armor. Ronan saw him too. The two leaders moved toward each other through the battle like magnets drawn together. When they met, their swords clashed with a sound like breaking iron. Elara fought her way toward them, cutting down anyone who tried to interfere. She reached the circle of combat just as Ronan drove Carvath back with a powerful strike that shattered the warlord's guard. Carvath stumbled, and Ronan's blade found his throat. The Shadowfen warlord fell, and with him, the last organized resistance collapsed. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the battle was over. The Shadowfen army had been destroyed. Perhaps 500 warriors had escaped into the marshlands, but they'd left behind their siege equipment, their supplies, and their leader's corpse. Elara stood among the rubble and bodies, breathing hard, her sword slick with blood. Around her, soldiers were cheering, embracing, shouting victory. She'd done it. Against impossible odds, with a plan everyone had called madness, she'd saved Ironhaven and broken the most feared army on the frontier. Ronan found her in the aftermath. His armor was dented, his face streaked with dust and blood, but his eyes were alive with something fierce and proud. "You were right," he said simply. "I told you I was certain." "No." He stepped closer. "I mean, you were right about everything. About merit mattering more than bloodlines. About people earning their place through blood and skill. You've proven it twice now." Elara felt something shift between them. A recognition, an understanding that went deeper than strategy or rank. "I couldn't have done it without your support," she said. "You could have." Ronan's voice was quiet, meant only for her. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then a messenger arrived, breaking the spell. "My king, urgent news from the capital." Ronan turned, his expression shifting back to command. "Speak." "Lords Harwin and Castor have escaped from the cells. They've fled the city with their personal guards and—" The messenger hesitated. "They've declared General Voss a traitor to the crown. They're gathering forces in the western territories to oppose her appointment." The words hung in the air like poison. Elara felt her stomach drop. She'd won 2 battles, saved thousands of lives, and proven her worth beyond any doubt, and they were still trying to destroy her. Ronan's expression went cold as winter iron. "How many forces?" "Early reports suggest 1,000 troops loyal to Harwin, another 500 to Castor. They're calling it a Council of Restoration." "It's not a council." Ronan's voice could have cut stone. "It's a rebellion." He turned to Elara, and she saw murder in his eyes, not directed at her, but at the nobles who'd pushed things this far. "We ride back immediately," he said, "and when we arrive, we end this, permanently." Elara nodded, her jaw set. She'd thought winning battles would be enough, but the frontier had just taught her a harsh lesson. Some enemies couldn't be defeated on a battlefield. Some wars were fought in palace corridors, with whispers and knives in the dark. And those were the wars that would define whether she survived or became another forgotten grave in a kingdom built on bones. The ride back to the capital was a forced march through hostile territory. 3,000 soldiers, bone-tired from battle, pushed their bodies beyond exhaustion because their king demanded it. Ronan set a pace that would have killed lesser men, and Elara matched him stride for stride, her mind already 3 moves ahead in a game where the stakes were her life. They rode through the night, torches blazing like a river of fire cutting through the darkness. Scouts brought back fragmentary reports. Harwin and Castor had fortified themselves in the western estates, consolidating troops, sending ravens to sympathetic nobles throughout the kingdom. The rebellion wasn't just 2 disgraced lords. It was metastasizing into something far more dangerous. On the second night, as they camped in a ravine to rest the horses, Commander Thrace approached Elara's tent. His expression was grim. "General, you need to see this." He handed her a proclamation, still sealed with Harwin's crest. Elara broke the wax and read by lantern light. The words made her blood run cold. "By order of the Council of Restoration, the commoner known as Elara Voss is hereby declared an enemy of the realm. She has bewitched our rightful king, manipulated him with feminine wiles and dark counsel, and led our armies into reckless slaughter for her own glorification. The true nobility of this kingdom will not stand idle while a low-born schemer corrupts the throne. All loyal subjects are commanded to refuse her authority and support the restoration of proper order. Elara read it twice, her hand steady even as fury coiled in her gut like molten iron. Bewitched, feminine wiles. They couldn't defeat her strategies, so they were attacking her gender, her origins, her very right to exist in their world. They're distributing this to every town between here and the capital, Thrace said quietly. By the time we arrive, half the kingdom will believe you're some kind of sorceress who's enslaved the king. Let them believe it, Elara's voice was cold. Words don't win wars, actions do. Words can turn armies, General. If enough nobles believe this propaganda, then we'll crush them too. She handed the proclamation back. Thank you for the warning, Commander, but I'm not going to hide from cowards who fight with ink instead of steel. Thrace studied her for a long moment. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most reckless. Can't I be both? A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. I suppose that's why the king trusts you. He paused. For what it's worth, General, most of the officers stand with you. We've seen what you can do. These proclamations are just noise from frightened men. Most isn't all. No, Thrace admitted. It's not. Watch your back. After he left, Elara sat alone in her tent, staring at the lantern flame. She'd known there would be resistance. But this character assassination, this attempt to destroy her reputation before she could even defend herself, was vicious in a way battlefield combat never was. A shadow fell across her tent opening. May I enter? Ronan's voice. It's your army. He ducked inside, his massive frame making the tent feel suddenly cramped. He carried a similar proclamation in his hand. You've seen it, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. I'm going to make them pay for every word. His voice was quiet, deadly. When we reach the capital, I'm going to drag Harwin and Castor into the throne room in chains and execute them in front of the entire court. You can't. Ronan's eyes snapped to hers. They've declared you a traitor. They've openly rebelled against the crown. They've given you exactly what they want, an excuse to look like a tyrant. Elara stood, moving closer. If you execute them publicly, every noble in the kingdom will see it as proof that I've corrupted you, that you're willing to kill fellow lords to protect your witch advisor. You'll validate their propaganda. Then what do you suggest? Let them spread these lies? No. Elara's mind was racing, assembling pieces of a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. We give them exactly what they're asking for, a trial, public, formal, with witnesses and evidence. Let them make their case against me in front of the entire court. Ronan stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to put yourself on trial. I want to prove once and for all that merit beats birthright, that I earned my position through skill, not manipulation. She met his gaze steadily. If I can't defend myself against their accusations in open court, then I don't deserve to be your general. This is insane. They'll stack the proceedings against you, bribe witnesses, fabricate evidence, then I'll dismantle every lie they tell. Elara's voice was hard as steel. I've fought on battlefields where one mistake means death. I can handle a courtroom full of aristocrats. It's not the same thing, isn't it? She stepped closer, close enough to see the firelight reflected in his eyes. You told me the frontier is a place where you fight or die. This is my fight, Ronan. Let me face it on my own terms. He was silent for a long moment, his expression warring between protectiveness and respect for her agency. If they convict you, he said quietly, I won't honor the verdict. I'll burn the entire court to the ground before I let them execute you. If they convict me, it means I failed to prove my worth, and maybe they'd be right. You can't possibly believe that. I believe in consequences. Elara held his gaze. I've asked 3,000 soldiers to risk their lives on my strategies. If I can't defend those strategies in a courtroom, then I have no business leading armies. Ronan's hand moved almost unconsciously to touch her face, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. The gesture was so unlike him, so vulnerable, that Elara's breath caught. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, he said. I'll take that as a compliment. It is. His hand dropped. Fine. We'll do it your way. But I'm appointing the judges, and I'm making sure the proceedings are public. Every citizen in the capital will witness this farce. Good. Let them watch. Let them see that truth matters more than rumors. Ronan left without another word, but the space where he'd stood seemed to vibrate with unspoken tension. Elara sat back down, her hands finally beginning to shake now that she was alone. She'd just gambled everything on a trial that could end with her execution. But the alternative, hiding behind Ronan's protection, letting him execute her enemies, would prove every accusation true. She'd rather die proving them wrong. Mom. They reached the capital 4 days later, and the city was a powder keg waiting to explode. Proclamations covered every wall, each one more vicious than the last. Citizens gathered in anxious clusters, whispering about the witch general and the king who'd lost his mind. Harwin and Castor's forces had blockaded the western districts, and there were reports of skirmishes between loyalist troops and rebel sympathizers. Ronan entered the city with his full army behind him, a show of force that sent a clear message. The rebellion would be crushed. But Elara noticed the faces in the crowds: fear, anger, confusion. These weren't people rallying behind their king. These were people terrified of civil war. The palace was worse. When Elara entered the throne room for the first time since leaving for Raven's Gate, she found it packed with nobles, all of them watching her like she was a serpent that had slithered into their garden. The hostility was a physical pressure against her skin. Ronan took his throne, and the room fell silent. I have called this assembly to address the treasonous proclamation spread by Lords Harwin and Castor, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. They have accused my chief strategic advisor, General Elara Voss, of manipulating the crown and acting against the kingdom's interests. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Therefore, Ronan continued, I am ordering a formal trial. General Voss will face her accusers in open court. All evidence will be presented publicly. Let the truth decide. The murmurs exploded into shocked conversation. This wasn't how things were done. Nobles didn't put themselves on trial. The king didn't allow his appointees to be publicly challenged. But Elara stood perfectly still beside the throne, her expression carved from ice, and let them see she wasn't afraid. Lord Corwin stepped forward, his elderly face troubled. My king, with respect, this sets a dangerous precedent. If every disgruntled noble can demand a trial of royal appointees, they can't, Ronan said flatly. But when those nobles commit treason and rebellion, they forfeit their right to quiet proceedings. This trial will be public, transparent, and final. The verdict will stand whatever it is. His eyes met Elara's for just a moment, and she read the unspoken message. I trust you. Don't make me regret it. The trial was set for 3 days hence, giving both sides time to prepare. Elara spent those 72 hours in a state of controlled fury, reviewing every strategy report she'd ever written, every decision she'd made, preparing to defend her entire career in front of people who wanted her dead. On the morning of the second day, a package arrived at her quarters. Inside was a single piece of parchment with neat handwriting. They're going to produce a witness who claims you sabotaged Lord Harwin's supply lines before the Western campaign. Fabricated testimony, but believable. Prepare accordingly. A friend. Elara stared at the note. She had no idea who'd sent it, but the warning was credible. Sabotage accusations would be almost impossible to disprove. It would be her word against a planted witness. She needed evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. That night, Elara did something she'd never done before. She broke into the palace archives. The records room was in the lower levels, guarded but not heavily. Most people didn't think old paperwork was worth stealing. Elara used a maintenance passage she'd discovered during her early days in the palace, slipping past the guards with the silent efficiency of someone trained in frontier survival. The archives were a labyrinth of shelves and filing cabinets, lit by a few scattered lanterns. Elara moved through them with purpose, searching for the original supply manifests from Harwin's estate. She found them buried under layers of more recent documents. The manifest showed exactly what she remembered, the deliberate weakening of arrow shafts, traced back to Harwin's personal orders. But there was something else. Correspondence between Harwin and Castor discussing how to remove the upstart from the War Council. This was proof. Written evidence of conspiracy. Looking for something, General? Elara spun, her hand flying to her dagger. Lord Corwin stood in the doorway, lantern in hand. His expression was unreadable. Lord Corwin, I was just breaking into the archives to find evidence for your trial. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I know, I sent you that note. Elara's mind reeled. You? I've served this kingdom for 40 years, Corwin said quietly. I've watched noble fools lead good soldiers to their deaths because they were too proud to listen to better ideas. When you dismantled my strategy at Black Ridge, I was furious. But then I watched you win that battle with minimal casualties, and I realized something. What? That I'd rather serve a competent commoner than an incompetent lord. He gestured to the documents in her hands. Those will help, but they won't be enough. Harwin and Castor have spent weeks poisoning the court against you. You need more than evidence. You need a demonstration. What kind of demonstration? Corwin's eyes gleamed. At the trial, they're going to claim your strategies are reckless and unnecessarily dangerous. They'll argue that traditional military doctrine would have achieved the same results with less risk. And you're going to prove them wrong, in front of everyone. He pulled out a map of the capital and surrounding territories. I've prepared a tactical scenario, a defense of the capital against a hypothetical siege. You and Harwin will both present strategies. The court will see, in real time, whose approach is superior. Elara studied the map. It was brilliant, a way to demonstrate her tactical superiority without risking actual lives. Harwin will never agree to this. He already has. He thinks it's a chance to humiliate you. Corwin smiled grimly. He has no idea what you're capable of. Why are you helping me? The old general was quiet for a moment. Because you remind me of myself 40 years ago. Young, brilliant, furious at a system that values bloodlines over ability. I fought that system for decades and lost every time. Maybe you can succeed where I failed. He handed her a leather folder. Everything you need for the tactical demonstration. Study it, and General, destroy them. The day of the trial, the throne room was packed beyond capacity. Citizens crowded the galleries, nobles filled the floor, and soldiers lined the walls. This wasn't just a trial, it was a spectacle, and everyone knew the kingdom's future hung in the balance. Elara stood in the center of the room, dressed in her full general's uniform, her sword at her hip. Across from her, Lords Harwin and Castor sat with their legal advisors, looking confident and well-rested. Ronan sat on his throne, his expression neutral, but Elara could see the tension in his shoulders. The proceedings began with Harwin's accusations. He stood, his voice booming across the chamber. This woman, he declared, pointing at Elara, has manipulated our king with feminine deception. She has led our armies into reckless battles that cost thousands of lives. She has— Name one, Elara interrupted, her voice cutting through his speech like a blade. Harwin faltered. What? Name one battle where my strategy resulted in excessive casualties. Provide numbers, specifics. Not rhetoric, facts. The Western Campaign. We lost 183 soldiers at Black Ridge using my strategy, Elara said, her voice clear and steady. Lord Castor's original plan would have sent 5,000 through an obvious ambush. How is saving 4,800 lives considered reckless? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Harwin's face reddened. You got lucky. Twice? Elara stepped forward. I got lucky twice? At Raven's Gate, we destroyed a 6,000-strong army with minimal losses using controlled demolition. Was that luck? Or was that understanding terrain and enemy behavior better than you ever have? You put our soldiers at risk with untested tactics. I put our soldiers in positions where they could win without dying needlessly. You put them in positions where they'd follow outdated doctrines straight into mass graves. Elara's eyes blazed. That's not strategy. That's aristocratic pride pretending to be military wisdom. The crowd was shifting now, leaning forward, engaged. Harwin could feel his narrative slipping. You sabotaged my supply lines, he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. Bring out your witness. A nervous-looking man was brought forward, a quartermaster from Harwin's estate. He testified with obvious coaching that he'd seen Elara tampering with arrow shipments. Elara waited until he finished. Then she produced the original manifests. These are your estate's records, she said, handing them to the judges. Signed by you, Lord Harwin, ordering the weakening of arrow shafts. I discovered the sabotage and replaced the shipment. Your own documents prove it. Harwin's face went white. You tried to sabotage your own army's equipment to make me fail, Elara continued, her voice hard. And when that didn't work, you fabricated a witness. Is this the proper order you're trying to restore? The courtroom erupted. Nobles shouted at each other, soldiers moved restlessly, and the judges conferred in urgent whispers. Order, Ronan's voice boomed. We will have order. When the room quieted, Lord Corwin stood. If I may, Your Majesty, I propose a final test. Let General Voss and Lord Harwin both present strategies for defending the capital against siege. Let the court judge whose approach better serves the kingdom. Ronan nodded. Proceed. Maps were brought out and the scenario was explained. A hostile force of 10,000 warriors approaching from the north. Limited time to prepare. The question? How do you defend the city? Harwin went first. His strategy was conventional. Reinforce the walls, position troops at the gates, prepare for a siege. It was textbook doctrine, the kind taught in every military academy. Then Elara stepped forward. You don't defend the city, she said. You defend the approaches. She traced her finger across the map. The northern road crosses 3 rivers before reaching the capital. We destroy the bridges here, here, and here, forcing the enemy to ford at narrow points where we can pick them apart with archers. We position cavalry units in the forests on either side of the road to harass their supply lines. By the time they reach the city walls, their army is exhausted, demoralized, and half-starved. She looked up at the court. Lord Harwin's strategy lets 10,000 warriors reach our gates intact. Mine ensures they arrive beaten and broken. Which would you prefer? The room was silent. Then, from the back, a soldier began clapping. Another joined. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. The judges conferred briefly, then the head judge stood. In light of the evidence presented and the strategic demonstration, we find the accusations against General Elara Voss to be without merit. She is cleared of all charges. Relief flooded through Elara, but she kept her expression neutral. The judge continued. Furthermore, Lords Harwin and Castor are found guilty of treason, conspiracy, and attempted sabotage of military operations. The sentence is, wait. Ronan stood, and the room fell silent. He descended from the throne and walked directly to Elara, and then, in front of the entire court, he took her hand. I have something to say, Ronan announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. General Voss has proven her worth beyond any doubt. She has saved this kingdom twice, transformed our military strategy, and shown that ability matters more than birthright. He turned to face the court, still holding her hand. She has also shown me what true partnership looks like, what it means to trust someone completely, to rely on their judgment even when the entire world says you're wrong. Elara's heart was hammering. What was he doing? From the moment I touched her wrist in the throne room, I felt something I'd never felt before, Ronan continued. A connection, a certainty. The frontier has a name for it, a bond that ties 2 fates together. No, he couldn't be saying what she thought he was saying. I don't care about mystical bonds or ancient traditions, Ronan said firmly. I care about what I've seen with my own eyes. A woman who is brilliant, fearless, and utterly incorruptible. A woman who would rather face trial than hide behind my protection. A woman who deserves to stand beside me, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. He turned to Elara, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Elara Voss, will you be my queen? The throne room exploded into chaos. Nobles shouted in outrage, soldiers cheered, citizens gasped. But Elara heard none of it. She could only stare at Ronan, her mind reeling. You're insane, she whispered. Probably. A smile touched his face. Is that a no? I'm a commoner. I have no royal blood, no political alliances, no... You have everything that matters. Courage, intelligence, the respect of the army. His grip on her hand tightened. And whether you know it or not, you have my heart. Elara felt tears prickling her eyes, which was absurd because she didn't cry. She'd survived battlefields, assassination attempts, and a public trial without shedding a tear. But this open declaration in front of the entire kingdom broke something loose inside her. "If I say yes," she said quietly, "they'll never accept it. Half the nobility will rebel. We'll tear the kingdom apart." "Then let it tear." Ronan's voice was fierce. "I'm done compromising with people who value bloodlines over ability. You've earned the right to stand here through blood and brilliance. Anyone who can't accept that can leave." Elara looked past him at the court, at the faces twisted with rage, the soldiers grinning, the common citizens in the galleries watching with something like hope. She thought about the woman she'd been 5 months ago, slamming her badge on a table and walking away from a kingdom that refused to see her. She thought about everything she'd fought for, every battle she'd won, every time she'd proven she was more than her origins. And she realized that Ronan was offering her something more radical than a crown, a chance to reshape the entire structure of power, to prove once and for all that the frontier belonged to those brave enough to claim it. "Yes," she said. The word rang through the chamber like a bell. Ronan pulled her close and kissed her in front of the entire court, a gesture so bold, so defiant, that it left no room for doubt or political maneuvering. This was a declaration of partnership, of equals choosing each other. When they broke apart, the throne room was in absolute chaos. Nobles were storming out, soldiers were cheering, and somewhere in the back, Elara heard Lord Corwin's dry voice. "Well, this should be interesting." But Elara wasn't paying attention to any of it. She was looking at Ronan and seeing her own fierce determination reflected back at her. They'd just declared war on the entire aristocratic system, and Elara had never felt more alive. Then a scream cut through the chaos. A noble near the door collapsed, an arrow through his throat. The courtroom erupted into panic as more arrows flew through the windows. Assassins were on the roofs, in the galleries, hidden among the crowd. Ronan shoved Elara behind him, his sword appearing in his hand like magic. "Guards, protect the court!" But it was too late. The attack had been planned perfectly, timed for the moment of maximum chaos. And as Elara drew her own weapon, watching the throne room transform into a battlefield, she realized with cold certainty that the trial had been a distraction. The real attack was just beginning. The throne room became a slaughterhouse in seconds. Elara's training took over before conscious thought could catch up. She moved on pure instinct, grabbing a fallen shield and deflecting an arrow meant for a young courtier frozen in terror. Around her, nobles screamed and scattered, trampling each other in their panic to reach the exits. But the exits were blocked. Assassins had sealed the doors from outside, trapping everyone inside. "Form up!" Ronan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through flesh. The soldiers in the room, initially caught off guard, began responding to command. They formed a protective ring around the throne, shields raised, creating a barrier between the crowd and the incoming fire. Elara's mind raced through tactical possibilities. The arrows were coming from the upper galleries and through shattered windows. 20, maybe 30 assassins based on the rate of fire. This wasn't a random attack. It was coordinated, professional, designed to maximize casualties among the nobility and blame it on the chaos of her trial. "We need to get to higher ground," she shouted to Ronan over the screams. "If we stay pinned down here, they'll slaughter everyone." "The galleries are 40 feet up with no direct access from the floor." "Then we make access." Elara's eyes locked onto the massive tapestries hanging along the walls, ancient weavings depicting the kingdom's history, each one thick as rope and anchored to heavy bronze rings. "Can you throw me?" Ronan's eyes widened. "What?" "The tapestries. Throw me high enough to grab one, I'll climb to the gallery and flank them." "That's insane." "Do you have a better idea?" An arrow struck the shield beside them, the impact jarring. Ronan's jaw set. "If you die doing this, I'm going to be very angry." "Get in line!" Ronan sheathed his sword and locked his hands together, creating a makeshift platform. Elara took 3 running steps and planted her boot in his palms. He launched her upward with shocking force, his strength magnified by desperation. Elara flew through the air, arms outstretched, and her fingers closed around the heavy fabric of a tapestry depicting the Battle of Crimson Fields. The ancient weaving held, and she began climbing hand over hand, using the woven scenes of historical carnage as ladder rungs. Arrows whistled past her, but she was a moving target now, harder to pin. She climbed with the efficient brutality of someone who'd scaled cliff faces in frontier territories where a slip meant death. When she reached the gallery, she rolled over the railing and came up with her sword drawn. 3 assassins turned toward her, surprise flashing across their masked faces. They hadn't expected anyone to reach them this fast. Elara didn't give them time to adjust. She moved like water through stone, her blade finding gaps in their defenses with surgical precision. These weren't common thugs. They had training, discipline, the kind of skills that came from expensive instruction. But they'd been hired to shoot fleeing targets, not fight a frontier-trained soldier in close quarters. The first assassin fell with Elara's sword through his ribs. The second managed to block her initial strike, but couldn't counter the follow-up that opened his throat. The third actually got his own blade up in time, and for 3 desperate seconds they exchanged blows that rang like bells through the gallery. Then Elara saw her opening. He overextended on a thrust, and she sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to send him over the railing. His scream cut off abruptly when he hit the marble floor below. She didn't pause. Moving along the gallery, she took down 2 more assassins who were too focused on the chaos below to notice death approaching from behind. By the time the remaining attackers realized what was happening, Elara had cut their numbers by a third. "Fall back," one of them shouted, and suddenly they were retreating, abandoning their positions and fleeing toward hidden exits in the palace's upper levels. Elara vaulted back on to the main floor using another tapestry, landing in a crouch beside Ronan. Around them, the throne room looked like a battlefield, bodies scattered across the marble, wounded nobles crying out for help, blood pooling in the groves between tiles. "They're running," Ronan said, breathing hard. "We need to chase them down before—" "No!" Elara grabbed his arm. This was a diversion. "What?" Her mind was putting pieces together at lightning speed. "Think about it. They had us trapped, had clear lines of fire, could have killed dozens of nobles. But they retreated the moment I took out 5 of them? Professional assassins don't break that easily unless they accomplish their objective." "Then what was the objective?" Elara's blood turned to ice. "To get us all in one room, to trap the king, the military command, and half the nobility while—" An explosion rocked the palace. Then another, and another. Through the broken windows, Elara could see smoke rising from multiple points across the capital. The armory, the garrison headquarters, the granary stores. "It's a coup," she whispered. Harwin and Castor weren't working alone. Ronan's face went white with fury. "Who?" A side door burst open and Commander Thrace rushed in, his armor scorched and smoking. "My king, the western gates are under attack. Lord Brennan has declared for the rebellion. He's brought 3,000 troops into the city. They're burning supply depots and trying to cut off the loyal garrison from the palace." Lord Brennan, one of the kingdom's wealthiest nobles, a man who'd sat silently through Elara's trial with an expression of polite disinterest. He'd been planning this the entire time. "How many forces do we have in the capital?" Elara asked sharply. 2,000 loyal troops scattered across the city," Thrace reported. "Another 1,000 civilians who've taken up arms. But Brennan's forces are organized, and they control the western district. Where's our heavy cavalry?" "Stabled outside the city walls. We can't reach them without going through Brennan's forces." Elara's mind was already mapping the city's layout, calculating distances and defensive positions. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and trapped in a palace that had just become a target. "We can't win a conventional engagement," she said. "Not with our forces scattered and theirs consolidated." "Then what do you suggest?" Ronan's voice was tight. "We can't just surrender the capital." "We don't. We change the battlefield." Elara turned to Thrace. "How many civilians are armed?" "At least 1,000, maybe more. They're gathering in the market district. And they know the city better than any soldier. Every alley, every shortcut, every hidden passage." Elara's eyes blazed with sudden certainty. "We turn the capital into a maze. We use guerrilla tactics, hit Brennan's forces from unexpected angles, fade into the civilian population, strike again. We make them bleed for every street until they're so demoralized and confused they can't hold territory." "That's not warfare," Lord Corwin said from behind them, his face pale, but his voice steady. "That's insurgency." "Exactly." Elara met his gaze. "Brennan expects a traditional battle, formations, honor, rules of engagement. We give him chaos instead." Ronan was staring at her with an expression caught between awe and horror. "You're talking about turning our own capital into a war zone." "It already is a war zone. I'm talking about winning it." She grabbed a piece of charcoal from a fallen brazier and began sketching on the marble floor. We divide our forces into small units, 20 soldiers, 40 civilians each. They know their neighborhoods. We teach them basic ambush tactics, have them strike supply wagons and isolated patrols, then disappear. Brennan's troops won't know who's a combatant and who's a citizen. That violates every rule of civilized warfare, Corwin said quietly. Good, because Brennan just violated the most fundamental rule of all. He attacked his own kingdom's capital during a moment of public celebration. Elara looked around the throne room at the dead and wounded. These people came here to witness justice. They got slaughtered instead. You think they're going to play by civilized rules when they fight back? Silence fell across the chamber. Then a woman's voice rang out from the crowd of cowering nobles. "I'll fight!" Everyone turned. Lady Sarah, a young noblewoman whose estate bordered the market district, stood up. Her dress was torn and blood-stained, but her eyes were fierce. "My brother just died in that attack. Tell me how to make them pay, and I'll do it." "My lady, you can't," an older noble started. "I can, and I will." Sarah's voice shook with rage. "They just murdered dozens of unarmed people in the throne room. If General Voss has a plan to stop them, I'm listening." 3 more nobles stood, then a group of soldiers. Then, from the galleries, civilians who'd been trapped in the attack began climbing down, their faces set with grim determination. Within minutes, over 100 people had volunteered. Ronan looked at Elara, and she saw in his eyes the moment he understood what was happening. This wasn't just military strategy. This was a revolution. The commoners and nobles fighting side by side, not because of bloodlines or duty, but because they'd all been attacked in their own home. "Do it," he said quietly. "Organize them." The next 6 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Elara divided the volunteers into cells, each one mixed with soldiers and civilians. She taught them basic ambush tactics, how to use choke points, how to strike and fade, how to make a small force seem like an army through strategic positioning. Lady Sarah proved to be a natural tactician, her knowledge of the noble district's layout invaluable. She organized the high-born volunteers into intelligence networks, using their servants and connections to track Brennan's troop movements. By nightfall, the city had transformed. What had been a conventional military occupation became a nightmare for Brennan's forces. They'd take a street, only to have supply wagons ambushed 3 blocks away. They'd secure a building only to find themselves under arrow fire from a dozen windows while civilians melted into the crowd. They couldn't tell who was a combatant and who was a bystander, and that uncertainty made them hesitant, defensive. Elara moved between cells, coordinating attacks and ensuring no single unit got overwhelmed. She was everywhere at once, directing an ambush near the granaries, organizing a false retreat that lured Brennan's cavalry into a trap, coordinating with Thrace to hit 3 separate supply depots simultaneously. On the 3rd day, Brennan made his first major mistake. Frustrated by the guerrilla attacks, he ordered his troops to burn a residential block as punishment for harboring insurgents. The fire spread faster than anticipated, consuming homes and shops, killing civilians who'd had nothing to do with the fighting. The city erupted. What had been a military rebellion became a popular uprising. Citizens who'd stayed neutral now took up arms. Merchants barricaded streets. Even children were throwing stones at Brennan's soldiers from rooftops. Elara was coordinating a response when a runner found her in a commandeered tavern that had become a makeshift command post. "General, Lord Brennan is requesting a parley. He wants to negotiate terms." Elara exchanged glances with Ronan, who'd been fighting alongside her for 3 days straight. His armor was dented, his face exhausted, but his eyes were sharp. "He's losing," Ronan said quietly. "His troops are demoralized and the entire city has turned against him." "Which makes him dangerous. Desperate men do desperate things." Elara studied the tactical map spread across the tavern table. "Where does he want to meet?" "The old cathedral in the neutral district. He's offering safe passage for you and the king." "It's a trap," Thrace said flatly. "He'll try to capture or kill you both." "Probably." Elara's mind was racing ahead. "But it's also an opportunity. If we can end this without more civilian casualties, we should try." "And if it is a trap?" She smiled grimly. "Then we spring one of our own." "What me?" 2 hours later, Elara and Ronan approached the cathedral with an honor guard of 20 soldiers. The building stood in the old merchant district, its weathered stone walls neutral ground by ancient tradition. Brennan's forces had formed a perimeter around it, but they looked nervous, exhausted, dirty, their formation more desperate than disciplined. Inside the cathedral, Lord Brennan waited at the altar. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, his expensive armor now dented and blood-stained. Behind him stood perhaps 30 guards, all of them looking as worn as their troops outside. "Your Majesty, General Voss." Brennan's voice was strained, trying for dignity and failing. "Thank you for coming." "You have 5 minutes," Ronan said coldly. "Speak. I want to end this bloodshed. I propose a compromise." "There is no compromise with treason," Elara interrupted. "You led troops against your own capital. You murdered citizens. You allied with Harwin and Castor knowing they'd tried to assassinate me. I did what I had to do to preserve the natural order." Brennan's composure cracked. "You're a commoner wearing a general's rank, about to become queen. It's an abomination against everything our kingdom was built on." "Our kingdom was built on conquest and survival," Elara said quietly. "Not bloodlines, not privilege. The frontier doesn't care who your father was. It only cares if you're strong enough to hold what you claim." "Exactly." Brennan's hand moved toward his sword. "And I claim the right to—" Ronan's blade was at his throat before he could finish the sentence. "Don't," Ronan said softly. "Don't make me kill you in a place of sanctuary." But Brennan had already made his choice. He signaled, and his guards drew weapons. The cathedral exploded into violence, except it wasn't the battle Brennan expected. The moment his guards moved, windows shattered all around the cathedral as Elara's hidden forces, civilians and soldiers she'd positioned on rooftops and in adjacent buildings, poured arrows into the interior. Brennan's guards, trapped in the open cathedral floor, were cut down in seconds. Brennan himself fell to his knees, Ronan's blade still at his throat, staring in shock at the bodies of his men. "You asked for a parley," Elara said, walking toward him. "I gave you one." "You chose to make it an ambush, so I made it a better ambush." You violated sanctuary." "No, I defended myself in a trap you laid." She crouched to meet his eyes. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to order your remaining forces to stand down. You're going to publicly confess your treason. And then you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell, thinking about the people who died because you valued your pride over their lives. And if I refuse," Elara stood, her expression cold as winter stone, "then Ronan executes you right here, and I spend the next week hunting down every soldier who followed you until they're all dead or surrendered. Your choice. Make it quick." Brennan looked at Ronan, perhaps hoping for mercy from the king, but Ronan's eyes were empty of anything resembling forgiveness. "I yield," Brennan whispered. Within hours, word spread through the capital. Brennan's forces, already demoralized and leaderless, surrendered by the hundreds. The rebellion collapsed like a house built on sand, and by dawn the next day, the city was secure. Elara stood on the palace balcony, watching the sun rise over a capital scarred by fire and blood, but still standing. Behind her, she heard footsteps. "You should rest," Ronan said quietly. "So should you." He joined her at the railing, and for a moment they simply stood together, two people who'd survived something that should have destroyed them. "They're calling it the Commoners' Rebellion," Ronan said. "The citizens who fought alongside the soldiers. The nobles who chose competence over birthright. They're saying it changed everything." "Did it?" "Yes." He turned to face her. "Because of you. You didn't just win battles, Elara. You changed how an entire kingdom thinks about power. I just refused to be invisible. And in doing so, you made everyone else see what was possible." Ronan reached for her hand. "The nobility will fight us. Some will accept the new order, but others will resist for years. It's going to be a long, brutal struggle." "I know." "And you're still willing to be queen? To fight that fight every day for the rest of your life?" Elara looked out over the city, her city now, in a way it had never been before. She thought about the citizens who'd fought beside her, the nobles who'd chosen principle over prejudice, the soldiers who'd followed her strategies even when they defied everything they'd been taught. I didn't come this far to stop now, she said. Ronan pulled her close, and she let herself rest against him for just a moment. They'd won the battle, but the war for the kingdom's future was just beginning. Below them, in the palace courtyard, she could see workers beginning to repair the damage from the attack. Citizens and soldiers working side by side, noble and common, all of them rebuilding together. There's something else, Ronan said. I spoke with Lord Corwin and the senior military council. They want to make it official. Make what official? Your reforms. Everything you've done, promoting by merit instead of birth, integrating common soldiers into command structures, tactical innovation over traditional doctrine, they want to codify it into law. Elara's breath caught. The nobles will never accept. The nobles just watched you save the kingdom twice and put down a rebellion using tactics they'd never imagined. The smart ones are already adapting. He smiled. And the stupid ones are no longer in positions of power. This is bigger than me. If we make these changes permanent, we reshape the frontier. We prove that kingdoms built on ability survive longer than kingdoms built on bloodlines. Ronan's eyes gleamed. We create something that lasts. Elara thought about the girl she'd been months ago, throwing her badge on a table and walking away from a system that refused to see her. That girl had wanted to disappear, to find somewhere else where she might belong. But this woman, the general, the queen-to-be, the commoner who'd broken every rule and survived, she didn't want to disappear anymore. She wanted to build. Let's do it, she said. That afternoon, in front of a court still reeling from the rebellion, Ronan made the proclamation that would echo through the kingdom's history. All military promotions would be based on merit, evaluated through formal testing and battlefield performance. Noble birth would no longer guarantee command positions. Common soldiers could rise as high as their abilities took them. Strategic innovation would be rewarded, not punished. And at the center of it all, as proof that the system worked, stood General Elara Voss, commoner, strategist, and soon-to-be queen. The nobles who remained, the ones wise enough to adapt, accepted it because they had no choice. The alternative was irrelevance or exile. But the common soldiers, the citizens, the people who'd spent their entire lives being told their origins defined their ceiling, they erupted in celebration. Lady Sarah, still wearing bandages from the battle, approached Elara afterward. You've given people hope, she said quietly. My brother died believing his birth limited what he could achieve. Now children will grow up knowing they can be anything. As long as they're willing to fight for it. Isn't that how it should be? Sarah smiled. Earned, not inherited. That night, as Elara finally allowed herself to rest, she found a package waiting in her quarters. Inside was her old captain's badge, the one she'd slammed on the table months ago, polished to a mirror shine and mounted on a plaque with an inscription. For the woman who refused to stay invisible, your king is proud. Your kingdom is grateful. Your future is unlimited. It wasn't signed, but she knew Ronan's handwriting. Elara held the badge, feeling the weight of everything it represented. The years of being overlooked, the battles fought in shadow, the moment she'd decided to walk away, and the moment she'd decided to stay and fight. She set it on her desk where she could see it every morning, a reminder of where she'd come from and how far she'd climbed. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Reshaping the military, navigating noble politics, preparing for the inevitable resistance from those who refused to change. But tonight, for the first time in months, Elara Voss allowed herself to believe she'd actually won. Not just battles, not just her position, but the right to exist exactly as she was, brilliant, fierce, and unstoppable, in a kingdom that had finally learned to see her. The first snow of winter arrived 6 weeks after the rebellion's end, blanketing the capital in white that couldn't quite hide the scars beneath. Elara stood at the window of her new quarters, rooms befitting a queen-to-be, though she'd insisted on keeping her desk from the general's office, and watched workers rebuild the market district. Noble and common, working side by side because there was no other choice. The old hierarchies had crumbled, and something new was rising from the rubble. But not everyone was ready to accept it. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Commander Thrace entered, his expression grave. General, we have a problem. The Northern Lords are refusing to send their tribute. They're claiming the new merit laws violate ancient compact, and they won't recognize reforms passed without full noble consensus. Elara turned from the window. How many lords? 7, led by Duke Valdrin. Together they control nearly a quarter of the kingdom's grain production and most of the northern trade routes. Are they mobilizing forces? Not yet, but Valdrin has called for a grand council, every noble house, ancient tradition. They want to debate the reforms formally and vote to overturn them. Elara felt cold certainty settle in her gut. This was the real test. The battlefield victories had proven her tactical genius, but changing the kingdom's fundamental structure required winning a different kind of war. One fought with words, precedent, and the careful dismantling of centuries of tradition. When is this grand council? 3 weeks. Valdrin demands it be held in the northern capital, on his territory. Of course he does. Elara's mind was already calculating angles. He wants home advantage, sympathetic crowds, and the psychological weight of us coming to him like supplicants. The king could refuse to attend, assert royal authority, and validate everything Valdrin is saying about us being tyrants who ignore tradition. Elara shook her head. No, we go. We face them on their ground, and we win. Thrace looked troubled. General, this isn't a battlefield. You can't outmaneuver them with cavalry charges. These are political battles, and they've been fighting them for generations. Then it's time they learned that merit beats experience when experience is just another word for entrenched incompetence. She turned back to the window. Tell Ronan we're going north, and find me every record of Grand Council proceedings for the last century. If we're going to dismantle their arguments, I need to know exactly what weapons they think they have. The journey north took 5 days through increasingly hostile territory. Villages that had celebrated Elara's victories now watched the royal procession pass with shuttered windows and silent crowds. Someone had been spreading poison here, rumors that the merit reforms would destroy the social order, that commoners would rise up and slaughter the nobility, that chaos would consume the kingdom. On the 3rd night, they camped in a fortified way station, and Elara found herself unable to sleep. She was reviewing council records by lamplight when Ronan entered her tent. You should rest, he said quietly. I'll rest when we've won. That's what you said before the last 3 battles. He sat across from her, his presence both comforting and challenging. Elara, you've been preparing for 2 weeks straight. You know their arguments better than they do. At some point you have to trust that you're ready. Am I? She looked up from the ancient parchments. On a battlefield, I can see the terrain, calculate the odds, predict enemy movements. But this? This is different. These people have spent their entire lives learning how to twist words into weapons. You're just the woman who outsmarted every military strategist in the kingdom and defeated a rebellion using tactics no one had ever seen before. Ronan's voice was firm. Don't let them make you doubt yourself now. They're going to attack everything. My birth, my gender, my relationship with you. They'll say I've corrupted you, that the reforms are just a way to consolidate power for myself. Let them say it. Then you'll prove them wrong, just like you always do. Elara met his eyes across the lamplight. What if I can't? What if all of this, the victories, the reforms, the hope we've given people, what if it all falls apart because I can't win a war of words? Ronan reached across the table and took her hand. You won't fail. Do you know why? Because you actually believe in what you're fighting for. They're fighting to preserve their privilege. You're fighting to save people's lives and give them opportunity. Truth is a more powerful weapon than they realize. Truth didn't stop them from starting a rebellion. No, but your strategies and the people who believed in you did. He squeezed her hand. You're not fighting this battle alone, Elara. Every soldier who earned a promotion through merit, every commoner who discovered they could rise beyond their birth, every noble who chose competence over tradition, they're all standing with you. Valdrin and his allies are the past trying to hold on to power. You're the future proving it deserves a chance. After he left, Elara stared at the council records with new eyes. Ronan was right. She'd been so focused on defending her position that she'd forgotten the offensive. She didn't need to just counter their arguments. She needed to dismantle the entire foundation those arguments rested on. And she knew exactly how to do it. The northern capital was a fortress city carved into mountainside, all gray stone and ancient defiance. The Grand Council met in a cathedral-like hall with vaulted ceilings and stained glass depicting noble lineages stretching back centuries. Every seat was filled with lords and ladies in elaborate finery, their expressions ranging from hostile to curious to calculating. Duke Valdrin sat at the head of the opposition, a silver-haired patriarch whose family had ruled the north for 8 generations. He stood as Ronan and Elara entered, his voice carrying through the chamber with practiced authority. Your Majesty, General Voss, welcome to the Grand Council. We gather today to address reforms that threaten the very foundation of our kingdom's stability. We gather, Ronan corrected, his voice cold, to address your refusal to honor royal decree. A decree that violated ancient compact, Valdrin gestured to the assembled nobles. The Grand Council was established precisely to prevent monarchs from making unilateral changes to the kingdom's fundamental structure. These merit reforms affect noble rights and privileges guaranteed by charter. They cannot be implemented without our consent. The charters also guarantee the king's right to command the military and establish promotion criteria, Elara said, stepping forward. Are you suggesting the crown needs noble permission to run its own army? We're suggesting that dismantling the hereditary officer system undermines the social contract that has kept this kingdom stable for 400 years. Valdrin's eyes were sharp. And that a commoner general who stands to benefit from these reforms has no business dictating policy. There it was, the personal attack, designed to delegitimize her presence. You're right, Elara said, and the chamber fell silent. I have benefited from merit-based advancement. I went from captain to general in less than 6 months, not because of my family name, but because my strategies saved thousands of lives and won battles everyone said were unwinnable. She walked toward the center of the chamber, letting every eye follow her. But I'm not the only one who's benefited. Commander Marcus Thrace, born the son of a blacksmith, now leads the capital garrison. Captain Sarah Whitmore, daughter of a minor noble house with no military connections, distinguished herself in the rebellion and now commands the Eastern Cavalry. Lieutenant Devon Cross, former stable hand, designed the defensive improvements that secured our western border. Elara turned slowly, meeting the eyes of nobles around the chamber. These people didn't get their positions because I corrupted the king. They got them because they were better at their jobs than the noble-born officers they replaced. That's what merit means. Not chaos, not social upheaval. Simply putting the most competent people in positions where they can save lives. A lovely sentiment, Valdrin said smoothly, but you ignore the practical reality. The nobility provides stability, resources, and trained leadership. Without hereditary succession in military command, how do we ensure continuity? How do we prevent every ambitious commoner from attempting to seize power through martial prowess? The same way we prevent noble-born officers from doing it, through law, oversight, and consequences for abuse of power. Elara pulled out a document from her coat. I've drafted a comprehensive military charter. It establishes clear criteria for promotion, regular competency reviews, and mechanisms for removing officers who fail to meet standards. Every promotion above captain requires review by a board of senior commanders, preventing any single person from building a power base. She handed the document to the council clerk. This isn't about giving me power. It's about creating a system that outlasts any individual, including me. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several nobles leaned forward to read the charter as it was passed around. Lady Morgan, an elderly duchess from the Eastern Territories, stood. General Voss, you speak eloquently about merit and competence, but many of us remember when similar reforms were attempted 200 years ago. They led to military coups, civil war, and decades of instability. How do you ensure your reforms don't repeat that history? It was a fair question, and Elara had anticipated it. The reforms 200 years ago failed because they tried to eliminate the nobility entirely, she said. They were revolutionary, not evolutionary. What I'm proposing is different. Noble families will still command if their children prove competent. High birth still provides advantages in training, education, and resources, but it's no longer a guarantee. She paused, letting the distinction sink in. The system I've designed doesn't attack the nobility. It challenges you to earn what you've been given, and those who do will be stronger, more respected leaders because of it. Lord Corwin, who'd traveled north with the royal party, stood from where he'd been sitting quietly. I am proof of what General Voss describes. I opposed her reforms initially. I saw them as an attack on tradition. But after fighting beside common soldiers who showed more tactical brilliance than officers I'd trained for years, I realized the truth. We've been wasting talent. He looked around the chamber. How many brilliant strategists have we lost because they were born in the wrong family? How many battles have we lost because incompetent nobles commanded troops they had no business leading? General Voss's reforms don't destroy the nobility. They save us from our own worst instincts. The murmurs grew louder. Elara could see the chamber dividing, some nobles nodding thoughtfully, others hardening in opposition. Valdrin sensed the shift. This is precisely the danger. She turns noble against noble, breaks the unity that has protected our class for centuries. Today she demands control of military promotions. Tomorrow she'll target land rights, taxation authority, judicial powers. Where does it end? It ends, Ronan said, standing from his throne, with a stronger kingdom. Duke Valdrin, you speak of unity and tradition, but you ignore reality. Our northern border faces constant raids because noble-born officers refuse to adapt to new threats. Our trade routes are vulnerable because the captains protecting them were appointed based on bloodlines rather than naval skill. The old system is failing, and clinging to it out of pride will destroy us faster than any reform. The old system, Valdrin shot back, survived 400 years. Your reforms have existed for 6 weeks. Forgive me if I question which has proven more durable. The old system survived 400 years with periodic purges, rebellions, and civil wars that killed thousands, Elara interjected. It survived because people had no alternative, not because it was effective. But now they do have an alternative. They've seen what's possible when ability matters more than birth. You can't force them to forget that. Then perhaps, Valdrin said coldly, we need to remind them why the old ways exist, why order and hierarchy prevent chaos. The threat was barely veiled. Elara felt the temperature in the room drop. Are you proposing another rebellion, Duke Valdrin? Ronan's voice could have cut stone. I'm proposing that the Grand Council vote to suspend these reforms pending a more thorough review of their long-term implications. If Your Majesty refuses to honor that vote, then yes, the Northern Lords may need to consider whether your judgment has been compromised. There it was. The final card. Declare the king unfit, claim Elara had corrupted him, and use that as justification for resistance. Elara stepped forward before Ronan could respond. You want to vote? Fine. Let's make it interesting. Valdrin's eyes narrowed. What are you proposing? A test. You claim the old system produces better leaders. I claim merit-based selection is superior. Let's prove it. She gestured to the assembled nobles. Choose your best military strategist from among the noble houses. I'll choose mine from the newly promoted officers. We present them both with the same tactical scenario, defending against a coordinated northern invasion. The council evaluates both strategies, then votes on which they'd trust to protect their lands. The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. You're asking us to gamble the northern defenses on a demonstration? Valdrin said incredulously. I'm asking you to prove your position has merit beyond tradition. If your champion's strategy is superior, the council votes to suspend reforms and I'll resign my position. But if my officer's strategy wins, you accept the reforms and resume sending tribute. Valdrin stared at her, clearly torn between pride and caution. Refusing would look like cowardice, but accepting meant risking public humiliation. And who, he asked carefully, would you choose as your champion? Lieutenant Devon Cross, former stable hand. 3 months of formal military training, natural tactical genius who designed the defensive system that's kept the western border secure, against my champion, Lord Aldrich Valdrin, my nephew, trained from childhood in military arts, graduated top of his class from the Royal War College, and commanding officer of the Northern Garrison. Elara smiled. Perfect. Shall we begin? The demonstration was held in the council chamber using detailed maps of the Northern Territories. The scenario was simple but brutal. A coordinated invasion by multiple raider clans with 15,000 warriors attacking during the winter when supply lines were most vulnerable. Both strategists had 2 hours to devise a defensive plan. Lord Aldrich went first. His presentation was polished, professional, exactly what one would expect from someone with elite training. He proposed a conventional defense: reinforce the major fortresses, stockpile supplies, use the northern mountain passes to create choke points, and grind down the raiders through superior fortifications and discipline. It was competent, traditional, and it would cost thousands of lives while leaving the countryside vulnerable to raiding parties. Then Devon Cross stood to present. The young lieutenant was nervous. Elara could see his hands shaking slightly, but his voice grew stronger as he laid out his strategy. Lord Aldrich's plan assumes we fight on the raiders' timeline, Devon began. We wait for them to mass, then defend fixed positions. But raiders don't fight that way. They're mobile, opportunistic. They'll bypass our fortresses and devastate the countryside. He traced new lines on the map. Instead, we use mobile defense, small, fast-moving units stationed throughout the northern territories. When raiders approach, these units harass them, destroy their supplies, and fade into familiar terrain. We make the entire north hostile territory. No safe camps, no predictable targets, constant attrition. Meanwhile, our main force stays mobile, ready to concentrate at any point the raiders mass. We let them enter the north, but we control where they can go and what they can take. By the time they realize they're trapped in a hostile maze, it's too late. Lady Morgan leaned forward. What about protecting the population? Your strategy leaves civilians exposed. No, my lady, it evacuates them. Devon pointed to a network of fortified towns. We've already identified secure locations that can shelter the entire northern population during invasion season. We move people to safety first, then turn their emptied towns into traps. The raiders find nothing to plunder and everything they touch bleeds them. You're describing the guerrilla tactics General Voss used during the rebellion, Valdrin said sharply. Importing siege warfare into normal military doctrine. I'm describing adaptation, Devon corrected. The raiders have changed their tactics. We need to change ours. Standing behind stone walls worked when armies fought set-piece battles. It doesn't work against enemies who refuse to fight on our terms. The council spent an hour questioning both strategists. Aldrich defended his traditional approach with confidence backed by historical precedent. Devon defended his innovations with tactical analysis and frank acknowledgement of risks. When the questions ended, Valdrin called for the vote. The chamber fell silent as nobles marked their ballots. Elara watched faces, trying to read which way the vote would fall, but the expressions were carefully neutral. The council clerk collected the ballots and counted them twice. Then she stood, her voice trembling slightly. The council finds Lieutenant Cross's strategy superior by a vote of 42 to 31. The chamber exploded into argument. Nobles shouted at each other, some celebrating, others furious. Valdrin sat frozen, his face a mask of shock. Ronan stood and silence gradually fell. The vote is recorded. Duke Valdrin, do you honor the terms? For a long moment, Valdrin said nothing. Then slowly, he rose. I honor the terms, he said, his voice bitter. The northern lords will resume tribute and acknowledge the merit reforms. But, he added, turning to Elara, do not mistake acceptance for approval, General. You've won today because you found a clever commoner who could outthink my nephew in a hypothetical scenario. That doesn't prove your system is sustainable long-term. You're right, Elara said quietly. One demonstration proves nothing, but give it 5 years. 10. Let the results speak for themselves. If merit-based promotion truly weakens the kingdom, you'll have all the evidence you need. But if it strengthens us, if our officers become more capable, our armies more effective, our borders more secure, then perhaps you'll admit that birth was never the best measure of ability. Valdrin held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. 5 years. We'll see. As the council dispersed, Lady Morgan approached Elara. You took an enormous risk today. I had faith in my officer. No. The elderly Duchess smiled faintly. You had faith in your system. That's more dangerous and more powerful. Faith can be contagious. That night, in the Northern Palace's guest quarters, Elara finally let herself collapse. The tension of the last 3 weeks drained out of her all at once, leaving her shaking with exhausted relief. Ronan found her sitting by the window, watching snow fall over the mountain city. We did it, she said quietly. We actually changed the kingdom. You did it, he sat beside her. I just gave you the authority. You provided the vision and the courage to make it real.
It's not finished. Valdrin and the others will fight us every step of the way. Every failure will be blamed on the reforms. Every success will be dismissed as luck or exception. Then we'll prove them wrong again.
And again, until even the most stubborn noble admits the truth. Ronan took her hand. Besides, you won't be fighting alone. We're partners now. In everything. Elara turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same fierce determination she felt. They'd transformed from king and subject into something far more powerful, two people who'd chosen each other and chosen to remake the world around them. When we get back to the capital, she said, we're getting married, immediately, before something else explodes or someone else tries to kill us. Ronan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Most romantic proposal I've ever heard. I'm a general, not a poet. You're my queen, he pulled her close. And you're extraordinary. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the same throne room where Elara had been put on trial. The symbolism was deliberate. A woman acquitted in that space now claimed her place at the highest level of power. The ceremony was unlike any royal wedding the kingdom had seen. Nobles attended, but so did common soldiers, citizens who'd fought in the rebellion, and representatives from every garrison where merit-based promotion had taken root. Lady Sarah stood as one of Elara's attendants, wearing the uniform of her cavalry command. Commander Thrace and Lieutenant Devon Cross were honor guards. When Elara walked down the aisle in a gown that somehow managed to be both regal and practical, she'd insisted on being able to move freely. She saw faces watching with hope, pride, and genuine joy. These weren't subjects observing a distant ritual. These were people who saw themselves reflected in her rise. Ronan waited at the altar in formal armor rather than ceremonial robes, another deliberate choice. This wasn't just a political marriage. It was a partnership forged in battle and blood. The vows were traditional but felt revolutionary, spoken by a commoner to a king. When Elara promised to stand beside Ronan as his equal partner in ruling the kingdom, several older nobles looked faint. And when Ronan crowned her, not with a delicate tiara but with a battle crown of steel and obsidian, the message was unmistakable. This queen would fight. The celebration afterward lasted 3 days. But on the 4th morning, Elara was back in her office, reviewing troop deployments and supply reports. Being queen didn't mean abandoning the work that had brought her here. A knock interrupted her focus. Lord Corwin entered, carrying a leather folder. "Your Majesty," he said, the title still strange on his tongue when addressing her. "Final report on the military reforms. You asked for comprehensive data." Elara opened the folder and found herself looking at numbers that made her chest tighten with fierce pride. Officer competency scores, up 37%. Mission success rates, up 42%. Casualty rates in border skirmishes, down 51%. Morale among common soldiers, highest in recorded history. Noble-born officers who'd earned their positions through competency, 63% retention. Noble-born officers who'd relied solely on birth, 41% retention, and most of those were focused on administrative rather than combat roles where they could do less damage. Applications to military service from common families, up 300%. These numbers, Corwin said quietly, represent thousands of lives saved, families that won't lose sons and daughters to incompetent leadership, soldiers who know their officers earned the right to command them. They also represent everything Valdrin and the others fear, Elara said. Proof that the old system was failing and the new one works. Then let them fear. Fear keeps people honest. Corwin smiled. You've done something remarkable, Your Majesty. You've proven that change doesn't have to mean chaos, that progress can strengthen rather than destroy. That's the legacy you're building. After he left, Elara stood at her window looking out over the capital. The market district was fully rebuilt now, better than before. The military barracks hummed with training exercises where common soldiers learned tactics from noble-born commanders who'd proven themselves worthy, and noble soldiers learned from common tacticians who'd risen through merit. She thought about the woman who'd slammed her badge on a table 9 months ago, furious and invisible and ready to disappear. That woman had believed her only choice was to hide or be destroyed, but she'd been wrong. There was a third choice, transform the entire system until hiding was no longer necessary. Ronan entered without knocking, one of the privileges of marriage, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. The eastern border garrisons just sent word, he murmured against her hair. They've repelled 3 raider attacks in the last month with 0 casualties. The new defensive tactics are working. Devon's tactics, Elara corrected. I just gave him the authority to implement them. You gave everyone authority to be their best selves. That's what leadership means. Ronan turned her to face him. The kingdom is changing, Elara. In 5 years, no one will remember a time when merit didn't matter. In 10, what you've built will be so fundamental that destroying it would be unthinkable. And the nobles who still hate me will die bitter and be replaced by their children, who'll grow up in a world where your way is normal. He smiled. You're not just changing the present, you're reshaping the future. That evening, Elara was summoned to the throne room for what she assumed was another administrative matter. Instead, she found it filled with officers and soldiers, all standing at attention. Commander Thrace stepped forward. Your Majesty, on behalf of the royal army, we wanted to present you with something. He gestured, and a soldier brought forward a battle standard, the kind carried into combat by elite units. But this one was different. Instead of a noble house's crest, it bore a simple design, a rising sun breaking through storm clouds. We're calling it the Banner of Merit, Thrace explained. It will be carried by units that exemplify the values you've established. Every soldier under this banner earned their place through skill and dedication, not birth or connection, and they fight knowing they represent something bigger than themselves. Elara took the standard, feeling its weight in her hands. It was more than fabric and thread. It was proof that what she'd built had taken root deep enough to survive without her constant tending. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. All of you. You took a risk believing in these reforms. You could have resisted, sabotaged, waited for them to fail. Instead, you made them work. You gave us a chance to prove ourselves, a young officer called from the crowd. Someone Elara recognized as a merchant's daughter who'd shown brilliant tactical instincts. That's all we ever wanted, a fair chance. As Elara looked around the throne room at faces that represented every corner of the kingdom, every social class, every background, she finally understood what she'd accomplished. She hadn't just climbed the ranks or won battles or even reformed the military. She'd shattered the invisible ceiling that had limited countless lives before hers. And in doing so, she'd transformed not just herself, but an entire kingdom's understanding of what was possible. 6 months later, Elara stood on a balcony overlooking a military parade. Thousands of soldiers marched in perfect formation, the Banner of Merit flying at the head of the column. Citizens cheered from the streets, and even the nobles in the viewing stands, most of them, anyway, applauded. Beside her, Ronan watched with obvious pride. Your army, he said quietly. Our kingdom, she corrected. Fair point. He squeezed her hand. Any regrets about staying when you'd planned to leave? Elara thought about that night in the throne room, the moment she'd thrown down her badge and prepared to walk away forever. She thought about all the battles since then, the victories and near deaths, the trials and transformations. Not one, she said. I was invisible for so long that I thought disappearing was the only option. But I was wrong. The answer wasn't to hide from a broken system. It was to break it and build something better. And now? Now we keep building, keep proving that merit matters. Keep fighting for everyone who comes after us and deserves the chance we had to climb as high as their courage can take them. She looked at him. The frontier belongs to those brave enough to claim it. We claimed it. Now we make sure it stays claimed for everyone. Ronan pulled her close, and they stood together watching the parade, watching the future march past in perfect formation. Below them, the Banner of Merit caught the light, its rising sun bright against the storm clouds. A promise that no matter how dark the night, dawn would always come for those determined enough to fight for it. And in the royal palace, in quarters that had once housed only those born to privilege, General Queen Elara Voss, commoner, strategist, revolutionary, smiled at the world she'd remade through sheer refusal to stay invisible. The woman who'd once tried to disappear had become the force that reshaped an entire kingdom. And her legacy would burn bright long after the last noble who'd opposed her had faded into forgotten history. Because truth, courage, and merit were forces more powerful than any bloodline. And once unleashed, they could never be caged again. 3 years passed. The kingdom transformed in ways even Elara hadn't fully anticipated. The merit reforms that had started in the military spread like wildfire through other institutions. Judges were now evaluated on their legal knowledge rather than their family connections. Tax collectors were held accountable for fairness rather than protected by noble patronage. Even the royal administration began recruiting talented commoners into positions that had been exclusively aristocratic for centuries. But success bred new challenges. Elara stood in the war room, now expanded to accommodate twice as many advisors, studying reports from the frontier territories. Ronan entered, his expression troubled. "The Eastern Kingdoms are requesting a formal audience," he said. "They want to discuss our radical social experiments and their impact on regional stability." "They're worried the reforms will spread to their territories," Elara said, not looking up from the maps. "Their nobles are getting nervous watching ours adapt or lose relevance." "It's more than nervousness. 3 kingdoms have formed an alliance specifically to contain what they're calling the merit contagion. They're threatening trade sanctions if we don't moderate our policies." Elara finally looked up. "Moderate? They mean reverse." "They're afraid, Elara. Afraid of what you've proven is possible." Ronan moved to stand beside her. "A commoner queen who earned her crown through brilliance and courage? That's a story that crosses borders. It gives people in their kingdoms dangerous ideas. Ideas like they deserve opportunity based on ability instead of birth?" "Exactly. And monarchs who rule through divine right and bloodline don't want those ideas taking root." Elara studied the map showing the Eastern Alliance. 3 wealthy kingdoms with powerful militaries and extensive trade networks. An economic war would hurt her people, but backing down would betray everything she'd fought for. "We don't moderate," she said firmly, "but we do something smarter. We prove the reforms make us stronger, not weaker. We show them that kingdoms built on merit survive better than kingdoms built on privilege." "How?" A slow smile spread across Elara's face. "By winning so decisively in every arena, military, economic, diplomatic, that other kingdoms start copying us instead of opposing us. We make merit-based advancement so obviously superior that resistance becomes absurd." Over the next year, Elara implemented a strategy of overwhelming success. New trade routes were established by merchant diplomats chosen for negotiation skills rather than aristocratic connections. Military innovations developed by common-born tacticians were shared strategically with allied nations, building goodwill and demonstrating competence. Agricultural reforms designed by farmers turned advisors increased crop yields by 30%. The Eastern Alliance watched in growing dismay as the kingdom they'd expected to collapse instead flourished beyond all historical precedent. One by one, cracks appeared in their united front. First, a minor noble in the southernmost kingdom successfully petitioned for merit-based military trials. Then a guild of merchants in another kingdom began advocating for reduced aristocratic trade restrictions. The ideas Elara had proven possible were spreading exactly as the Eastern monarchs had feared. 2 years later, the alliance dissolved entirely when one of its members formally requested advisors from Elara's kingdom to help implement similar reforms. Elara stood on the palace balcony watching the delegation arrive, nobles and commoners traveling together, seeking knowledge about building a more meritocratic society. Ronan joined her, shaking his head in amazement. 5 years ago, you slammed your badge on a table ready to disappear forever, he said. Now you're reshaping the political landscape of the entire region. Not me. The idea. Elara watched the delegation enter the palace courtyard. I just proved it was possible. They're proving it's inevitable. Any regrets about the battles we've fought? The enemies we've made? Elara thought about Lords Harwin and Castor, rotting in prison cells. About Duke Valdrin, who'd retired to his northern estates in bitter resentment. About the countless nobles who'd fought her every step and lost. None, she said. Every battle was necessary. Every enemy chose their position, and everyone who embraced change prospered. She turned to face Ronan fully. I learned something these past 5 years. The frontier doesn't just belong to those brave enough to claim it. It belongs to those wise enough to share it. Power hoarded becomes brittle and breaks. Power shared becomes flexible and lasts. Is that your new philosophy of governance? It's the truth I've lived, she smiled. The woman who wanted to disappear discovered she was actually meant to illuminate. to show others what's possible when courage meets opportunity. Below them, in the courtyard, she saw faces from across the social spectrum, nobles who'd earned their positions, commoners who'd risen through brilliance, soldiers who'd proven themselves in battle, scholars who'd contributed innovations, farmers whose practical knowledge had reshaped agriculture. All of them possible because one woman had refused to stay invisible. All of them proof that the frontier belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it. Ronan wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Ready for the next challenge?" Elara laughed, the sound rich with confidence earned through 5 years of transforming impossible into inevitable. Always. Together, they watched the sun set over a kingdom reborn, not through bloodline or divine mandate, but through the simple radical idea that ability mattered more than birth. And in every corner of that kingdom, in every soldier who'd earned their rank, every farmer whose ideas had been heard, every child who now believed they could rise as high as their courage could take them, Elara's legacy burned bright. The woman who'd tried to disappear had instead become a light that would guide generations, and the frontier would never be the same.